Hi, I'm Greg Ninnis for interest.co.nz, and I'm joined today by Hayden Duncan, who's the Chief Executive of Harcourts Group, which is New Zealand's biggest real estate company. Welcome, Hayden, and thanks for coming along today.
Well, thanks for having us, Greg. It's good to be here.
I see Harcourts sold 1,565 homes last month and brought in 1,871 new listings. Those figures weren't too different from June last year. Where does that put the market that we're in now in terms of activity?
I think to take New Zealand as a whole is a really difficult situation at the moment,
Sure.
Given we've got a number of different paced real estate markets,
Yep.
Well covered in relation to the pace and prices in Auckland, and we'll talk a little bit about Auckland more specifically in a minute, I think, and obviously Christchurch.
Yeah.
But we've seen certainly very same on last year, and the impact, I think, of a number of factors from loan to value ratios, particularly in the provinces and smaller centres throughout New Zealand, having a bit of an impact. I think cold weather tends to have
Sure.
an impact. There's that
Every
winter slowing of people rather staying in by the fire than going out looking for homes, and also the view people hold around interest rate rises, albeit that we're still at sort of historically very, very low levels. And the interest rate side of things is purely an indicator of the health of the economy. So if those continue to increase, we expect to see volumes increase off the levels that they are now.
Okay.
The levels that we're sitting at the moment in relation to homes available for sale in New Zealand are by historic levels very, very low, and that probably balances out the demand factor at the moment. And probably most New Zealanders, when they go out looking for homes, particularly in Auckland and Christchurch, are probably not feeling like it's an easy environment to be buying homes in.
Sure.
Because of that limited stock.
Okay. Let's go to Christchurch now, and I think the figures there showed that things were reasonably buoyant. I know they've been, Auckland and Christchurch have sort of been hitting the headlines just lately, but also there's been a lot of new stock coming onto the Christchurch market, I believe, as homes get fixed up and put on the market or new ones are built. How are things shaping up down there overall?
There's no question that at the moment there's still more demand than there is supply.
Okay.
And there's been some challenges over the last couple of years, particularly directly post the earthquake, with people wanting to secure homes they could live in.
Yeah.
That put an unusual demand on that marketplace. Most of the commentary in the media has focused on the strong prices that have been
Yes.
achieved in Christchurch, and people consider that to be signs of a strong marketplace. There's two things we consider for strength of a marketplace. One is volume of transactions. The other is obviously values. Values are strong based on an artificial supply and demand.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed, as is well reported, that the rebuild of Christchurch has been slower than probably what most Cantabrians would like. That doesn't seem to be changing. The pace is pretty consistent.
Right.
But things are happening.
Okay.
On a volume side of things, volumes are still at a very historically low level in Christchurch,
Okay.
but there is a limited number of properties now in comparison to what there were a few years ago.
So more listings coming through down there. Where are they coming from?
Look, I think there's probably a couple of factors. One is I think we're starting to see a stream of new build homes that
Right.
since the earthquakes, we've got land that has been developed by private developers. Those are now coming on stream, and that is freeing up a little bit of that really tight stock environment,
Okay.
as well as a lot of those homes that have been repaired, and people had bought other homes while their own homes were being repaired directly post-earthquake.
Okay.
Those are now surplus to their requirements.
So do you think they're sort of starting to get on top of the problems that they've had down there now?
I probably wouldn't suggest that they're getting on top of it. I think that the pace at which that is recovering has got some real challenges around it, both with net inflow of population, with people coming into work.
Yeah.
They didn't, post the earthquake, lose a lot of the population that was there beforehand.
Sure.
They're pretty tough, those Cantabrians.
Yes.
They've hung in there, but they haven't got the accommodation to look after the population they had pre-earthquake,
Right.
let alone the incoming number numbers of workers that are required to speed that process up. So housing is going to remain in Christchurch under pressure for some time in our view.
Still very strong demand drivers down there.
Absolutely.
Okay. In Wellington, things look, I would say, pretty flat. We've got listings, not much changed. The stock of available houses for sale hasn't changed much, and prices haven't changed much. Sales were down a bit last month. How do you see things there?
Best way to describe Wellington is if you're concerned about values in Christchurch or Auckland and you want to live in a main centre in New Zealand, then Wellington's the place to go.
Okay.
The affordability in Wellington is good, but it is and always has traditionally been a very conservative city by New Zealand standards.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have the capital there. There's still a large reliance on government sector, and we are in an election year. As well as that, throw in a bit of conservatism around interest rates increasing, loan-to-value ratios. They probably did have a greater impact in Wellington on that market than they did in Auckland and Christchurch.
Why do you think that is?
They didn't have the imbalance of supply and demand prior to the LVR coming in, and I think in Auckland there's real pressure on the tenancy market as well. And so when the loan to value ratios came into effect, some of the first home buyers that weren't able to purchase in that lower area were probably, that gap was filled by investors who were coming in saying, hey, we'll buy those rental properties. We've now got a really captive audience of tenants, and that drove some activity in that space, which was probably not what the Reserve Bank wanted to see. And I think no one can really tell us, but I think if you looked at the impact of loan to value ratios by region and area, I don't think they've had the desired impact on the two markets that they really wanted it to have, and that was Auckland and Christchurch.
Right.
Wellington was one of the losers in that because they didn't have that supply and demand pressure prior.
Okay.
The first home buyers were hindered in their efforts to get into the property ladder, and there wasn't the demand from the investors
All right.
that we saw in the other heated markets
Yeah.
to pick up that gap. That then has a flow on to people moving from their first homes into their second homes and right through the market over a period of time.
Okay.
It's probably just a well-balanced market, really.
Yeah.
If,
We do get a bit blinded by Auckland and Christchurch sometimes.
We do,
don't we?
so yeah.
Outside of the main centres, Provincial New Zealand, is there a common trend there?
It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. I think the headlines have grabbed the good markets and have probably avoided talking about Provincial New Zealand too much over the last few years. The provincial real estate sector's never really recovered after the global financial crisis, either on values or on volumes. And I think if you were just to wander down the street in Taupo or in the provinces through New Zealand and say to someone that's trying to sell a house in those provinces, hey, how's it going? They'd think it's pretty tough. There's it's weak. And again, I think the loan to value ratios have had an undue impact on those that Provincial New Zealand really didn't need.
Okay.
At that stage.
Why do you think that was? Because I'd assume prices and property values are lower in the smaller provincial centres than they are, say, in Auckland. So house prices should be cheaper, and maybe so the LVRs would be less of a problem for first home buyers. Why have they been hard hit, do you think?
I think if you look at the stimulus for people buying into first homes, there's a large motivator of that is job security, cash flow, and obviously being able to raise a deposit. And Provincial New Zealand is still very much reliant on the rural sector for jobs, whether it be in the farming and rural sector or even just in the service sector in those provincial towns. Those haven't probably been as solid, and the confidence hasn't been there that is required.
So it's just added to that general uncertainty or weakness for those people.
Our rural sector, I think our farmers following 2007 through the GFC have really sort of focused on debt repayment and are probably, even with the strong payouts over the last few years out of the Fonterra milk auctions, I don't think there's been a lot of that flowing through the farmers and into those communities, or not as much as what we would have seen prior to 2008 because of the debt reduction and probably a level of conservatism that's crept back in there.
Okay. And then that brings us to Auckland, of course, which is either the star or the problem child of the market, depending on your outlook. You know, I look at the figure everyone looks at is that average price or median price, depending on where the numbers are coming from each month. The average price of homes sold by Harcourts in Auckland last month was $721,553, nearly $750,000. Any sign of that easing back a bit? What are your people telling you out there in the field?
There's no doubt that's a frightening number, Auckland certainly is, I think, the problem child. It's not being driven by cheap money. It's not being driven by reckless borrowing. It's not speculation. It's really just purely that, you know, our mayor's been flogging on about wanting to have Auckland as the most livable city in the world, and you know, I think in a way we've started to achieve a very desirable city in Auckland, and with that obviously comes population and both from within New Zealand and absolutely from overseas. So we've got a lot of provincial movement into Auckland, and the data's showing us that, as well as you know, net inflow into New Zealand, primarily focused on Auckland, if not Christchurch for work. And that's putting pressure on a underinvested property market in Auckland. We haven't got the high volume development that a big city needs. Right. If we want to have a city in Auckland that is the most livable city in the world, then we've got to start learning how to go up. You know, we can't keep going out, because then we have debates like today over harbour bridges and highways and motorways and all those sorts of things, which are important. But we've got a city that's actually got a magnificent setting for inner city real living, and yet we haven't got an environment that encourages the private sector developers with the knowledge and the funding ability to actually go in and take those risks to build up. Yeah. You know,
do you think the buyers are ready, the public is ready to be buying that sort of property rather than looking for a standalone house, which is what we're used to in New Zealand more? Do you think the market is shifting now, that they would be buying more into medium to high-rise developments if they were available?
Yeah, no question. I think with the nature of the Auckland housing market, you've got nearly $750,000 now to go out and buy yourself a house if you're just a sort of middle Aucklander, so to speak. If you were to be able to go and buy a new 3-4 bedroom family type apartment that has a bit of space in it, that is in that sort of price bracket in the middle of the city, surrounded by water and public transport, the vibrancy of a city, I think we've got both the age demographic as well as you know, we've got a real cultural mix in Auckland now, and people are coming from countries where they're used to living in high density, high-rise homes, and they're just not catered for here. Okay. Also, hey, what are you going to compare it to? An infill housing on a half a site with no grass.
Yes, it's practically an apartment anyway.
Exactly, much better views up high.
Auckland, of course, you know, until recently it was a collection of smaller cities, and I suppose it's a collection of smaller markets too. Is it very different from, you know, Auckland Central, what was the old Auckland City Council's areas, and to south, to west, out to the North Shore? Are they all markets in their own right, or are the same pressures being faced throughout the greater Auckland region?
Auckland as a region is as different as New Zealand is, and there is still some good affordable homes in what they now call Auckland, and I guess it's like any city, the closer you get to either the centre of the city or to the waterfront and the beaches, obviously the values are starting to come under some pretty strong pressure, and some big prices being paid for those by New Zealand standards. As you head further away from the city and the nucleus of where jobs are available, then you do tend to find that prices start to become more affordable very rapidly. You know, there's some really good, well-priced homes in South Auckland, West Auckland, and up through the Hibiscus Coast and Whangaparoa. You can still buy a beautiful home in Auckland for you know, $500,000, and it sounds like a lot if you come from you know, Gisborne, but it's by Auckland standards, you can still buy a beautiful home for $500,000.
Okay.
You just got to travel a bit.
Okay. Some of those, outlying areas, I'm thinking of parts of West Auckland, for example, have shown some really strong price growth in percentage terms over the last year or so. Do you see that continuing?
Taking West Auckland specifically, I think it was undervalued, and I recall going back to 2007, and there was an article that one of the major daily papers ran in New Zealand on affordable homes and where to buy for the future, and they identified West Auckland as an undervalued area for a number of reasons. One, it's still relatively close to the CBD of Auckland, and it's got good public transport. You've got trains, you've got buses, and you've got beaches. So it does. I think it's just had a bit of catch up,
right.
and I think it's probably now on par with the rest of Auckland in relation to where it probably should be sitting.
Okay.
But magnificent to see the quantum and quality of the development that's gone on out through West Auckland.
All right, so we're in the literally in the middle of winter now, which is always the most difficult time for real estate. But looking ahead to spring, where there's often a bit of a pickup as people start to get out and about and think about selling their homes, what sort of shape do you think the market might be as later in the year?
I guess being in the real estate sector, we're always optimistic.
Sure.
But hey, look, I think what we've seen this year is a real winter, and that's reflected in the numbers. There's still strong demand and there's strong appetite for real estate. And this year, people's homes look great in spring. They come out, they look good, feel good. The weather's warming up, and it's traditionally a time New Zealanders go to market. And so once we see volumes of listings increase in spring, I think there'll be plenty of demand to absorb that.
Okay. So you don't see any major changes to the traditional patterns we get at the market?
No, I think this year we've seen probably more of a traditional pattern than what we've seen other years. Right. We've got an election later this year. Yeah. I don't think that's going to have a great deal of impact on our real estate markets.
That's great. Thanks very much, Hayden.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on interest.co.nz today.
My pleasure.